Chapter 11. New Beginnings. It had been 6 months since Jeanette had passed away. Passed away was being polite. She had been murdered. Not by just anyone. It was John, her loving husband and the father of their children. John Jr. had started kindergarten. Tammy went to the same school, but she was a preschooler, so only went for half a day. JT's had survived the storm and was back to landing 1 or 2 contracts a month. Things had finally turned around for John's company. He was no longer being a laborer and was back to getting contracts for the firm, making sure the company ran smoothly, and above all else, to him anyway, providing jobs. At this time of year, JT Renovations was doing exclusively indoor work. The roofers had been laid off for the winter months, but this was normal and expected. John had moved Bob indoors as a supervisor. John had hired another supervisor because they usually had 2 jobs on the go at the same time. John couldn't be happier because of this. An autopsy hadn't been performed on Jeanette. They called it a death of natural causes. John had her cremated and had arranged to have her remains put in a mausoleum. John, although not inspired to do so, brought the children there once a month to see their mother. He didn't like going. It served to remind him of what he had done, and he still wasn't at ease with that. He didn't know if he ever would be, but he did his best to put it behind him and get on with the rest of his life. He found the children themselves were a constant reminder of their mother's passing. It wasn't unusual that an autopsy hadn't been performed. Unless it was a suspicious death, they wouldn't be, except in cases where the family requested it. Even though the medical community hadn't pinpointed the cause, she had been to the doctor twice. Once she was prescribed antibiotics and once antivirals. The family knew she was sick. Maria knew she was sick. The neighbor knew she wasn't feeling well. John had been careful enough to hide the point of injection under her hair. Getting her cremated required no hoops to go through. It had been done, and no suspicions had arisen. Had John committed the perfect crime? Whether he had or hadn't didn't matter. What mattered was that the family had to get on without her. To his own surprise, John had started to see a younger woman. Daniela was only 23. Like Jeanette, she too was hot. It had started 2 months ago, only 4 months after Jeanette's death. One Friday evening, John had gone out to get his mind off of what he had done, and he met Daniela. He had noticed her sitting alone at the club. She didn't seem to be enjoying herself. John joined her and introduced himself. They hit it off and arranged to have dinner the following weekend. Dinner went well, and it led to them seeing one another again. This continued for a few weeks when John decided he would introduce her to his children. It was a big step for John, and one he didn't take lightly. He was now involving his kids in his personal life, and felt Daniela would be viewed as a replacement for their mother. John had no such intentions. His children still meant the world to him, and the last thing he wanted to do was make everything more difficult for them. Daniela was a recent university graduate and didn't have a lot of practical experience. She had studied business administration at Laurentian University, specializing in accounting. She didn't at all project the image often associated with accountants. A short, somewhat out of shape, spectacled man. She was 5 feet, 8 inches tall, and weighed 120 pounds. She had long, shapely legs. She was very good looking and was well aware of it. She often wore short skirts with high heels. Her long, flowing blonde hair often blew in the wind. She wasn't at all shy about accentuating her features with makeup. She was a very good-looking woman by anyone's measure, including John's. Her looks had attracted him even before he had introduced himself that Friday night at the club. She found him handsome and well-established. Both of these traits had attracted her. His looks initially, but not long afterward. His success as a business owner. This was the day. Until now, John and Daniela were boyfriend and girlfriend. He was 10 years her senior, but this didn't seem to bother either of them. They always had a good time when they went out. A really good time. She was smitten with him. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Lake, had reservations, but for their daughter's sake, kept to themselves. She was young and vibrant in their eyes, and had always managed to make the right decision. There was no reason to question what she was doing now. They accepted her for who she was. They always had, and they weren't going to change their ways now. If Daniela loved John, then they did too. She had never been to his home. She knew where he lived and knew he had children. She wanted her own. She also knew his former wife had passed away, and although this, along with the fact that he already had children, had bothered her when she had first found out, it wasn't going to deter her. She may have felt differently had she known how Jeanette had died, but she didn't. All she knew was she was in love, and John made good husband material. That was what she wanted. He'd already told her that he wanted to have her children. He had told her that nothing would make him happier. This had made her really happy. Ecstatic, in fact. "Are you ready?" John asked as they were about to turn into the driveway. Taking a deep breath, she answered, "As ready as ever." "The kids won't necessarily accept you right away, but they're good kids. Please remember, they've lost their mother." "I know, John. I never try to replace her. I can't. Your mother is your mother." Smiling at her understanding, he said, "You're so understanding. That's why I love you so much." This brought a broad smile to her face. He's so understanding, and he loves them so much, she thought. John had taken the Audi to pick her up. She didn't deserve the truck. She at least deserved this. Not only that, she was taking a big step in his mind. She was coming to meet Johnny and Tammy, his kids. There was no way to get more brownie points in his mind. But she wasn't at all aware of this. She was doing it for her own needs. She knew she didn't have a chance with John if the kids didn't accept her. "Here we are. It's beautiful. You have a beautiful home. I like it," John said matter-of-factly as he opened the door. "I'm home. I hope the kids were no trouble. None at all, Isabel responded as John handed her a $10 bill. It was no trouble. You were only gone for 20 minutes. Isabel was the next door neighbor's kid. She was only 12, but John knew he wasn't going to be long. He had just gone to get Daniela so she could meet the children. You don't have to pay me. I know. Buy yourself a treat. Don't let your parents know. Thank you, Isabel said as she made her way to the door. Johnny, Tammy, I'd like you to meet someone. Who? They asked from downstairs. It's a friend. I would like you to meet. Come upstairs. Johnny and Tammy stopped watching TV and hurried upstairs. Daniela couldn't help but notice how obedient they were. Hi, my little ones, John said as they arrived at the top of the stairs. I would like you to meet a friend of mine. This is Daniela. Say hi. Hi, they said together with strange smiles coming to their faces. They had never met her. Her relevance didn't register. They were just being polite. Daniela decided she needed to take the bull by the horns and asked, What's on television? Nothing. Just some cartoons. Your favorite ones? Yes, they giggled. It was very nice of you to come up and say hello, but you better get back to your show. Okay. Yes, go back downstairs and continue watching. I just wanted you to meet Daniela, John said, and then turning to Daniela, he asked, Would you like a glass of wine? If you have one, I'd love one. Come up. Please be seated. John poured 2 glasses of wine and sat beside Daniela in the living room. He had done it. He had made introductions. He had already accomplished what he had set out to do today. He had introduced his children to Daniela. The JT's truck pulled into the office on Kathleen and came to an almost screeching halt in front of the brick wall. John jumped out and quickly made his way in. He got a coffee before going into his office. Once inside, he sat at his desk. The company was doing well, better than even he had anticipated. They had 3 jobs on the go, and he had hired enough people to get them done. It wasn't JT's success that had been occupying his mind these days. He was recently trying to understand how Jeanette could have done what she had done. Johnny and Tammy had accepted her death much better than he had. Sure, he had killed her, but it wasn't that. He was having an extremely hard time accepting why Jeanette had done what she had done. He had always provided for the family. He was handsome. He was successful. They lived in a nice home. In his mind, he had done everything right. Yet despite all of this, she had an affair. The thought of what she had done to him caused his insecurities to well up inside of him. He no longer felt like a man. He felt he hadn't provided well enough for her. Daniela was a marvelously attractive young woman. Any man would have been lucky to have her. She was a knockout. She was younger than he was by 10 years. Quite a feat. But the inadequacy he felt because of Jeanette's betrayal still consumed him. It didn't matter what was right or wrong. It didn't matter that he had always provided well for his family. It didn't matter that everything he did was for them. What mattered to John was the sense of insecurity that was overwhelming him. Consistent with the emotional flexibility kids were blessed with, Johnny and Tammy were handling their mother's death much better than he was. They were at school, and much to John's delight, they didn't have to go to public school. They still went to the private school Johnny had started at. This year, while Johnny spent all day at school, Tammy only spent half the day. They were easing her in. John also still had the luxury of having Maria come by on a daily basis. He wasn't sure he needed her to be there all day, but he hadn't changed her schedule. It was the easiest to leave everything the same. It was working, and he very much lived by the philosophy, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Back around the same time John had killed Jeanette, business had picked up for JT Renovations. They now had 2 or 3 jobs on the go at one time, and it wasn't even that time of year for roofing to pick up. That was going to start in another month, maybe 2. It depended on how quickly spring came. John couldn't have been happier. JT's had turned the corner. It was about time in his mind. The economic slump had lasted for 2 years. It hadn't come to it, but having Maria come by every day was close to being rethought. The kids had almost been enrolled in a public school, and virtually invisible to everyone but themselves, John and Jeanette had severely curtailed their social life. Going out for dinner together, which had been not quite a daily event, had been relegated to at the most a weekly event. These cost-cutting measures hadn't become necessary though, and now that JT's had turned the corner, they wouldn't be. As John sat at his desk, wondering what he had to do to make sure the company kept thriving, his mind wandered back to what Jeanette had done. He couldn't come to grips with it, but his curiosity was getting the better of him. He knew Jeanette had met Jean-Paul at Lifestyles. He was an instructor there. John wondered whether he still was, and concluded it was likely. John decided he would go by and see. He pulled his truck into the parking lot of the Lifestyles gym. He sat in the truck hesitating. No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go inside and see if Jean-Paul's there. I'll pretend I'm interested in joining. That'll work. John went through the front doors. There was someone at the front desk. He walked over. "Good afternoon," the attendant said as John approached reception. "Hi. I thought I might check out your facilities. I'm thinking about joining. We have excellent facilities. We have the latest exercise equipment. We have very reasonable prices. Right now we have a special for $395 per year. Are you interested in cardiovascular exercise? Strength?" "A little of both. As I get older, I'm not in the same shape I used to be in." "Do you have time for a quick evaluation? We could have one of our instructors evaluate where you're at. It would only take a few minutes." "Do you still have an instructor named Jean-Paul?" "Yes, we do. He's one of our better instructors." "Will he be working tomorrow?" "Yes, he will be. Why?" "I've heard of him, that's all. It's going to be difficult for me to be evaluated today. I have other commitments, but I thought I could come by tomorrow for the evaluation. I'm thinking of joining. Would Jean-Paul be available to be my instructor?" I think he could be. I could ask him. Okay, if you would, I'd appreciate that. The receptionist left and went through the doors to the gymnasium. He was back in a couple of minutes. Jean-Paul could take you. He'd be available for an evaluation at 11:15 tomorrow morning. Would that work for you? It would. So at 11:15 tomorrow, Jean-Paul will evaluate me? Yes, it won't take long. You won't need gym clothes, but it would be helpful if you wore athletic shoes. Once you're evaluated, Jean-Paul will work out a schedule for you. Sound good? Sounds good. I'll see you just before 10:45 tomorrow then. I'll be here. I'll remember you. Okay, see you tomorrow morning then, John said and turned to go out the front doors. Goodbye. See you tomorrow just before 11:15. John had gone home after Lifestyles, having had accomplished the first step of a yet-to-be-determined plan. He was going to meet with Jean-Paul this morning to be evaluated for a workout regimen. John didn't know why he was doing what he was doing, but for whatever reason, he wanted to be evaluated by Jean-Paul. He had an overwhelming desire to meet him. Jean-Paul had caused his marriage to dissolve. He had caused John to kill Jeanette. For whatever reason, John had a need to meet the man that had caused all of this. It might have been idle curiosity, or it may have been something more devious. John didn't know. All he knew was that he had this overwhelming desire. He couldn't get away from it. Oh my God, it's almost 10:30. Looking at the clock on the wall, John thought, I have to be going. He rushed out of the office to his truck. He put it quickly in reverse and backed out. He went to Lifestyles, quickly got out of his truck, and ran to the door. He opened it. Mr. Travers, the receptionist greeted him. No hurry. Jean-Paul is just in the back. You have your shoes in the bag? Yes, I do. Go right through the doors. Jean-Paul is expecting you. All right, John said as he made his way to the door that led to the gym. There were two men standing by the weight machine off to the left of the gymnasium as he entered. They were both about John's height at 6 feet tall. They weighed around 180 pounds and were both in excellent shape. He didn't know which one was Jean-Paul, if either of them. Just then, the guy on the right said, Mr. Travers? Yes. Hi, I'm Jean-Paul. We have an appointment at 10:30, he said, walking toward him with his hand extended to shake John's hand. John obliged. The two men greeted one another. How much do you weigh? Just over 190 pounds. And you're how tall? About 5'11". Did you bring some shoes? Yes, they're right here in the bag. Put them on and we'll get started. This won't take long. I just need to check your flexibility out. I want to see how much you're comfortable lifting, but you look like you're in pretty good shape. Thank you. I try to stay in shape. We'll make sure of that. That's what we do here. That's not all you do, John thought. Jean-Paul didn't make the connection. He had never known Jeanette's last name, or at least he didn't remember it. He had never bothered to ask or find out. All he knew was that she had disappeared. No goodbye, no see you later. He had assumed she had second thoughts, and he had left it at that. He had never been comfortable with having been involved with a married woman. He was right. His evaluation only took 10 minutes. I'll take the results, and I'll come up with a routine for you. I think I can squeeze something into an hour 3 times a week. Would that work for you? It would. That would be perfect. I'll give you a call tomorrow. We have your number? We can start this week if you'd like. That'd be great. The number's at the front desk. See you later. And John left to return to the office. What am I doing? John thought, sitting at his desk. He should have been focusing on getting another job or two for JT's. He had a pile of paperwork to complete to make sure payroll would go in on time, but he was having a very difficult time focusing on what he should have been. He didn't understand what had compelled him to search Jean-Paul out, particularly at this stage. It had been over half a year. He now had a new girlfriend. The kids seemed to be alright. JT's was doing well. If it kept going like this, he would have to hire some more workers. He hoped, but he was fairly confident he could easily hire roofers for the jobs that were sure to come. He worried a lot more about getting the more skilled workers needed for the indoor jobs. He was optimistic that the indoor work would continue to grow. JT's reputation for indoor work had grown as well over the winter months. Nonetheless, he was more thinking about lifestyles in Jean-Paul than the future of JT's. He looked at the clock on the wall and decided to take the afternoon off. He wasn't being very effective here. He would do it tomorrow. He still had time. Hi, Maria. What are you doing home? Maria asked. I was having a hard time focusing at work, so I thought I'd take the afternoon off. Well, you can't work all the time. A day off every now and then only helps. Daddy! John heard from downstairs. It was Tammy. She ran upstairs yelling, Why are you home? I came home early today to see you. She smiled. What did you think about Daniela? She seemed nice. Is she your girlfriend? Out of the mouths of babes, he thought. Somewhat sheepishly, he answered, Tammy, she's just a friend. Why did you bring her here? To meet you, adding, and your brother. Did you like her? He wanted to know what his children thought. Not at all being surprised, he understood his children's acceptance of her was of the utmost importance. It was of importance to him, too. He didn't at all want for them to think she was their mother's replacement. No one could be that. Certainly not in their eyes. He was walking a fine line and knew it, but Daniela meant a lot to him. If he wasn't in love, he was close to it. Yes, she's nice, pretty too. That she is. Did your brother say anything? Nope. Treading lightly, feeling like he had pushed her far enough, he asked, How did school go today? It was fun. What did you do? Coloring. What did you color? A coloring book. Do you like that? Did you learn any more of your ABCs? I like coloring. We went up to P. Do you want to tell me your ABCs? No. He knew he had gone far enough, so added, "What are you watching today?" "Just a show." "Well, you better get down there. You'll miss it." Jumping at his suggestion, she hurried downstairs. John turned to Maria and asked, "Did you want to get home? What about dinner?" "I'll make something. It's not a problem." "I know it's none of my business, but who's Daniela?" "Just a woman I started seeing." "That's good, John. I know it can't be easy, but you have to get on with things. I know I do. I just don't want to be doing it for the wrong reasons. I worry about the kids, too." "I know you do, but you have to get on with your life. It's awful what happened to Jeanette, but it can't be changed. The children will come around. It's going to be hard on them at first, but they'll come around," she offered, hoping she was making his decisions easier. If only she knew what actually happened, she wouldn't be so understanding. Not everyone kills their wife for indiscretion. He couldn't help thinking. "About leaving early. I wouldn't mind if you're sure it's all right." "I'm sure. Get out of here. I'll see you tomorrow." "Okay, see you tomorrow."